Welcome to the Matt Waller Podcast, where we look at success at the intersection of technology, logistics, supply chain, retail, and CPG, also known as the retail value chain. I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, New Road Capital Partners. New Road invests in proven technologies, services, and products that serve unmet needs in the marketplace. They look for companies in supply chain and logistics, as well as consumer-oriented companies. For more information, go to newroadcp.com. I would also like to disclose that I am a strategic advisor to New Road. I'd also like to recognize podcastvideos.com for the services they provide for these podcasts. I'm very pleased with their services. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have a really exciting episode today. I have with me today Omid Moghadon, who has an extensive, interesting career in innovation and entrepreneurship. He has over 40 patents. He's worked for companies like Eastman Kodak and Intel. In fact, he started a couple of companies that were spun out of Intel that you'll get to hear about. So if you're a investor, if you're a inventor, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're interested in healthcare, direct consumer, et cetera, you should listen to this podcast. Omid talks about so many really interesting things. He talks about the story of actually spinning out these two companies from Intel. He talks about one story that you'll love. He talks about how Intel's market cap is about the same as it was 20 years ago. NVIDIA's, though, has gone up tremendously from $3 billion to $3 trillion, roughly. So, and he talks about why that might be. It's a very interesting story. He's served on dozens of company boards, and now with his new company that he started 5 years ago, and he's the CEO of, which is based upon some science that came out of breast cancer research from some surgeons. He's got a company that can, Namita, that can identify breast cancer early. And he talks about how, right now the kinds of approaches to identifying breast cancer, like imaging, mammography, are really rough. They're not able to pick up. They can have false positives very easily, and then a biopsy has to be done. But there's not even enough equipment or professionals out there to do all the mammographies that need to be done, and consequently, a lot of times the breast cancer is discovered in later stages, and then the treatment's expensive, very expensive. And so his company has a direct consumer product that you can buy online that basically solves this problem. It does screening real early. And, some people may not even want to do a mammography because of maybe the distance they have to go to town or because of how uncomfortable it is. They can do this and get screened, and, it could save lots of lives. So I think you're going to find this interesting. You'll also hear about how Omid has been interested in inventions since he was 7 years old. It's a very interesting story, so I think you're going to like it. Omid, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Being on the Matt Waller show is sort of like playing the Caesar room in Vegas. I know I've made it.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you. But, okay, now I want to start with an interesting story that I know about you, and that is where your interest in Inventions came from. Would you mind sharing that story with us?
Oh, yes. I was 7 years old, and there was a British TV series called Connections, done by the presenter, James Burke, who was also the writer of the show. And every episode started with a new technology. And during that 1 hour episode, he would take us through time and how one invention led to another, led to another, and led to another. And it would go, sometimes we go back to Greeks, Romans, Middle Ages.
Just have the best shows. Because when I was young, I watched, I think it was 1979, there was a show called Free to Choose. And it was like a series of 10 shows, and it affected my future.
Yes.
That was back in 79. But go on.
Around the same time for me. I mean, I was 7 years old, so it was mid-70s. And that show, by the way, he made Connections 2, Connections 3, The Day the Universe Changed. So James Burke actually went on to making a lot more of those and write books about all of them. I invited him to speak to my group at Intel at one point.
Did he come?
He did.
Is he still around?
I believe he would be a very old man at this point. But all those shows are on YouTube. If you decide to watch them, they're all free.
So you had him speak to your team at Intel. What did he talk about?
Inventions. I mean, he was at Intel, so it's technology. And he basically, same theme of how one invention leads to another. And sort of like quoting Sir Isaac Newton, standing on the shoulders of giants, and how none of these things that we do today are done by themselves, and they have roots in history. And I've always loved history, and even as a child, and marrying history to invention, sort of like the two things that I really liked, sort of cemented like the direction that my career was going to go.
That's really neat. Do you think that's a big reason why you wanted to work at Intel?
I usually take jobs based on projects, not on the location. And I've always been interested in new things, creating new things. And out of graduate school, I just wanted to get a PhD and teach, be an academic. That was my goal. And through some happenstance, I took a year of leave of absence because my PhD advisor took a year of leave of absence. And I ended up at Eastman Kodak, which at the time was this conglomerate very much like Google today that had many different divisions working on many different type of technologies. And I was given an opportunity to do something really interesting and something new. And at the end of that 1 year, which was in cardiology, was in cardiac imaging. And at the end of that 1 year, I remember this conversation with the head of that division that, why do you want to go back to academia? Look at the things you can do here. Any technology you create, anything new you create here, in academia would be a couple of papers and a grant, and it might never go anywhere. Here, 100 million, 1 billion people could be using it every day.
Neat.
And that cemented my, that was the end of my, full-time academic career. I've gone back to academia part-time on an adjunct basis, but never full-time. So that was very interesting. That was very interesting to me, and I basically have never looked back.
Well, I know when you were at Intel, I remember you telling me about some of the innovative things you were working on, and then you actually started a business for Intel at one point. Could you tell that story?
I actually started two businesses. One of them was a spin-off. We spun out a healthcare IT company called Dacia, which was a new concept that we had created ourselves, which was a personally controlled health record. And that spin-off was in 2005. And that's what brought me to Northwest Arkansas for the first time. Because Walmart was after Intel, Walmart was the second investor in the company and eventually its largest client. At the time, Walmart was trying to get into healthcare. I think it was their second or third attempt to get into healthcare.
What year was that you moved here?
Well, I moved here much later, but
okay.
started going back and forth from Boston, where the company was based, to here, because our largest client was here. And that was '05.
Oh.
XNA had 2 gates and 1 small building.
Well, at least XNA existed.
Yes, that's true.
But when I moved here, it was Drake Field, and it was terrible.
I've heard those stories. Yeah, that's the dark times.
Yeah. So you were flying back and forth.
I was. And then, we had Walmart executives who would come to our board meetings and in Boston. And so that was the first company. And the second one was a company called Intel Genomics. It was actually called Intel Analytics Services, but doing business as Intel Genomics. And we were doing basically what's today's called machine learning and big data, but for the next-gen sequencing market. At the time, there was this boom. There was 3 different companies that had just came up with next-gen sequencers. These are whole sequencing machines, whole genome sequencing machines. And each machine would drop about 1 terabyte of data a night. And somebody had to sort out that. And we built a business around that.
Why do you think they picked you to start these businesses?
It's a little bit like Harry Potter. The wand picks the wizard, not the other way around. I was always the instigator. I'm the one who went looking for things and then looking for a little corner of sanity where I could actually work on these things. And that's innovation, or doing really radical innovation inside a large company requires that. And there's not too many companies that can pull that. Actually, almost no company can pull that off. The only one I can think of is the ones that have a mercurial founder, CEO, that's still in charge. And it's his vision or her vision, and they really push it. Someone like Edison, like Musk, Steve Jobs, that are willing to bet the company on that. No one else can pull it off. That's why large companies can only do incremental improvement, because that's just the way they're set up. They're set up for incremental improvement. A lot of them talk about doing radical innovation or innovation in general, but that usually they fail at it.
So you're right. Tons of companies talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, and it's very clear that most of them fail at it. Why do you think that is?
I think business professors would say company culture. But if you dig a little bit deeper, what is company culture? Company culture is what you value, who you promote, how you promote people, on what basis, and how you reward people. And if the reward is for taking risks, even if they don't pay off, and not at the other side, which is you punish people for taking risks. Nobody ever gets punished in a large organization for not taking a risk that could have made something. But you will get punished for taking a risk that did not pay off.
What an insight. That's a good point.
Yeah, that's why lawyers do so well in Fortune 500, because their job is basically risk management. So before I got into healthcare at Intel in '05 and end up spinning off Dacia, that healthcare IT company, I was in the proper business of Intel, which was semiconductors and all the technologies surrounding and deploying it. And Intel has these few items that they pick every year called the corporate strategic discussions. And the company's future depends on the results of these CSDs, so-called CSDs. And once you get a CSD assigned to you, you get to pick a team and you work for months. And you basically come back with a case for an investment, for doing something or for not doing something. And one of the CSDs that one of my colleagues and myself ran had to do with the way Intel design chips and we manufacture them. And the comparable, we were looking at NVIDIA as the company that we were comparing ourselves to at that time. Intel's design cycles for microprocessors took 5 years. So we had to invent a whole new architecture for the chip, learn how to build it, and then equip the manufacturing sites to build completely new fabrication sites. to build that technology. So end to end, because we had in-house manufacturing. Now, what Intel rewarded was the complexity in design. So the engineers, the designers, the chip designers who designed the more complex system always won the promotion.
Why did they reward that?
Because for the longest time, when computing, the cycles that you used in computing and software were for things like Excel and SAS and other things. That complex system won the day, because that's how they won the RISC-CISC wars with that design and that complexity, and the fact that we invented the manufacturing that went along with it was a barrier to entry from other people. But NVIDIA started in graphic chips, which is a different type of computation, and the warning sign that we brought to the table to the executive staff in 2004 was that more of computing is going in that direction. More computing is becoming imaging. It's becoming video. It's becoming computer vision. It's becoming AI and machine learning. And the trajectory is that more of computing is going to be what NVIDIA is good at and less of what we're good at. But our chips are not designed for that. And the way NVIDIA designs its chips, because they did not have their own manufacturing, which meant every bit of complexity in their chips meant higher manufacturing cost at TSMC and UMC in Taiwan, meant that they rewarded simplicity in design rather than complexity in design. As a result, they could come up with a new chip every 6 months to Intel's 5 years.
So do you think that difference drove the difference we see today?
Absolutely. At the end of that CSD, Andy Grove told me that I'm not as stupid as I look. He was a charmer. And absolutely. So I went back, just with historical reasons, I went back and looked at market cap of NVIDIA and Intel back then. And then I looked at market cap of NVIDIA and Intel today.
So over the past 20 years?
20 years. So Intel's market cap is exactly where it was.
Are you serious?
Absolutely. About 143 billion. NVIDIA was 3.2 billion. And now it's 3.4 trillion.
Whoa. That's an unimaginable market cap.
Absolutely. They won the day. And the way innovation works in large companies, I mean, our project was approved. We got the money to go and make what we call the mini core chip. Because the way NVIDIA's chips are different than Intel is that instead of one very complex core, they have these cores that are replicable. So it's like pieces of mosaic that you put on a substrate. It's the same core. Software has a much bigger role on those chips in managing what goes where on the chip. And that is an easy chip to replicate, because if you design a new core, you put 100 of them on a substrate, and that's your new chip. You need one for a mobile device, you put 10 of them on a chip. You need something for a server, you put 1,000 of them on a chip. And that sort of simplicity in design and manufacturing is what won them the day. And you get about, in a large corporation, typically for doing radical innovation, you have about somewhere between 18 to 24 months. And after that, the antibodies come after you. They either come to poach your people, they either come to after your budget, or they just like what you're doing, but they want to incorporate it into what they're doing, which is the radical. It's not radical, it's incremental improvement. So I'm reminded of the story of the Bradley fighting vehicle and the debacle that went through in the Pentagon, because it was supposed to be a joint forces armored personnel carrier. And in the depiction of that story that was made for HBO, a little humor involved in there, they are, all admirals and generals from the various forces are sitting around the table, and while the generals from the army, from the armored corps, are saying we need these features in this vehicle, the admiral from the Navy says we need some portholes in there, and it needs to float. And so when they first, after a few $1 billion of expenditure, the first one that they put sank to the bottom. So that's when they basically outsourced it to an Israeli company, and that's the Bradley fighting vehicle that we have today. And that's basically radical innovation versus incremental. And in large companies, they take something like the many-core chip that we were trying to design, they take it into a regular microprocessor design group, and they basically try to incorporate it as an add-on, as a sidecar to a very complex core. Because now it needs to do all that other stuff too. So that's not the point. This is supposed to be a new chip design, not that. So that was quite a saga through that.
You mentioned Elon Musk earlier, and I had just a few months ago finished reading his biography by Walter Isaacson. I really liked it. But it's interesting, your point. I mean, he really gets involved in some details that, like, he'll ask a basic question, like, why does the fin on that have to be so big? Couldn't it be smaller? I mean, he'll ask obvious things almost like a child would ask, but a lot of times they unveil issues or opportunities, sometimes nothing, but he questions everything, yes, obviously. Yes. And he has high hopes for things. But the other thing I've noticed in reading the book is, for example, with Tesla or SpaceX or many of the other companies that he has, including Neuralink, well, let's take Tesla just as an example. The people who are involved in designing the cars have their desks out on the factory floor so that they can be aware of, what's going on. Similarly, even for making, things like SpaceX products, the sourcing managers, not just the engineers, the sourcing managers are on the floor. And so they know, so everyone's involved thinking about the production of whatever it is. And so when issues come up, it's not through a long line of people, and they tend to be very vertically integrated where they're, they can change things pretty quickly. But their innovations are quite remarkable. Now, he's had a lot of failures. I remember when he was first trying to launch various spacecraft, they would blow up. And people kept thinking, this isn't going to work. He eventually got it to work, but he wasn't afraid to keep trying. And now with the rockets, the boosters that land vertically, this is a very tricky thing to accomplish.
It is. And if he was an employee of a rocket company, he would have been fired by now.
Definitely.
After the second launch vehicle blew up, he would be fired. So he would never get a chance to do this. And having everyone in the view of the product, sourcing managers, engineers, and factory workers building things, that is a very startup scale
yes.
model. Because in a startup, everyone's around the same table. You have a small team, everyone knows what's going on. And large companies fail because information just doesn't get through the different layers of management. Who was that old-timey GM manager, CEO, who talked about the frozen middle?
Oh, yeah.
That there's this frozen layer of middle management that does not allow information from lower-level workers and from line workers to actually get to where the larger decisions are made at the executive level.
Well, I even think about X, now Twitter, formerly Twitter. Elon Musk improved it so quickly. Like, for example, and sometimes I remember one time I was using it, he made a post. He said, if you want to do something, I don't remember what it was now. This was not long after he bought it. Look down the lower right-hand corner, and you click there. And so here it is. The CEO of the company is making a post about how to use some functionality. I think it was about casting the video you're watching onto your TV.
Mm-hmm.
They made it real easy. And I had wondered about it because there was something on there I had found that I wanted to show my wife, and I was trying to figure out one time. I gave up. I see this post of his, and I try it, and boom, it works. I thought, how many companies of that size have a CEO that would do something like that,
Yeah, that's why there's not a lot of people like him.
Not a lot.
It's like a once in a generation type of people, like Edison or Hughes.
Even Benjamin Franklin, I know he wasn't a scientist at all, but he came up with so many great ideas and innovations.
Well, those guys at that time, those guys were everything. They were scientists, they were businessmen, they were farmers, they were musicians, printers. Yeah, they were highly educated men.
I sometimes think that engineers today, we train engineers in a certain way, but it seems like it would be nice if they got their hands dirty while they were studying engineering and got involved in soldering and welding and putting things together.
Yes, no, I absolutely think that is a good part of the education.
A lot of times people don't think so. They think, well, that's like a trade. You're not going to be, you're not going to be welding if you're a mechanical engineer, but welding if you're a mechanical engineer could give you insights and also an ability to create a prototype.
Fairly quickly, yes, it's true. I like engineering as a discipline. It's I find it much more useful than science because science never ends. You're always trying to look into new questions because once you answer one question, you have to go for another one because it's never ending. The knowledge needs, you don't always have all the knowledge in one field. But engineering is the discipline of making things with incomplete data, because you're never going to have all the data that you need. But at some point, you have to say, I have enough, and I need to make something work. And figuring out all the parameters that need to be taken into account with incomplete data is a discipline of engineering. And getting your hands dirty and actually building things gives you a physical feel for that. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got interested I did welding, I did wood shop, I tinkered with motors, and I was always interested. So that's why I studied engineering. And engineering has helped me in everything, in life sciences, in diagnostics and medical devices, in everything that I've done.
So, as an entrepreneur, both within a company and outside of a company like you're doing now, what are some of the most challenging lessons you've had to learn?
I think this applies to both being inside a large company or doing things on your own, that coming up with a new thing is the easiest part of your work. So that's that flash of brilliance that creates a new invention or a new business model or anything. That's just the beginning. And that's probably the easiest part. Finding a market fit for what you have done, that's the hard part. And as someone who was enamored with inventions, 40 or so patented inventions, and I had to learn that lesson very early in my career, that just because here, look, I've invented something new and you all need to adopt it, just doesn't work. You actually have to find a market fit for it. And that's where the real art is. Some of the most successful people that we have just talked about, they were not the inventors and they were not the first ones with that tool or with that new technology. They were fast followers, very fast followers. Steve Jobs. Apple didn't invent any of the stuff that we use today of Apples. Yeah, they looked at failures of others with that technology and they learned how to figure out a better market fit. Elon Musk came to Tesla after it was a 10-year-old company.
Yeah, he bought it.
Yeah. It was making roadsters.
One other interesting thing about that is that, when Elon Musk was working at PayPal in the early days, he was pushing for it to be a financial tool, not just for paying, but for doing all kinds of things, way beyond paying. And he lost the battle. He also wanted to change the name from PayPal because he said, we're not going to be just about paying. He wanted to change the name to X.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
And so he had the first, he had X.com way back then. And he had the first email address with X.com. And so when he bought Twitter, some people were thinking, okay, this is about freedom of speech and things like that. But a lot of people that were familiar with his story were thinking, oh, it gives you an idea of what he wants Twitter to be.
Right. I heard that, I think maybe it was an X or tweet by him that said his dream is to make this similar to WeChat in China. That does,
yes.
That it's a social network, it's a payment network, and other things. So I guess he gets to execute on his PayPal dream.
You do wonder sometimes, it's like, how can he have all of these different companies? I mean, you really think about it. X compared to SpaceX. Neuralink compared to Tesla. All these companies he's involved in are pretty different from one another.
Yeah.
Oh, the Boring Company. I forgot.
Oh, Boring, yeah.
The Boring Company, which is a funny name for. But he's got big ideas about making boring tunnels more efficient. But these are really challenging ideas.
It is, and Musk is different than sort of like the rest of Silicon Valley, which right now is basically software and social media. Yeah, it's he's actually making things, and it is not a very popular thing to do in Silicon Valley, especially among venture capitalists. Nobody is funding making things. They just want a SaaS business model that they can cash out of quickly. But he's actually making big things. Cars, rockets,
solar panels, batteries,
boring equipment.
Now that you're the founder and CEO of Namida, you're really off on a different path, than starting a company from a big company like Intel. This is really challenging. First of all, tell me about how you got into that and where you're going with it, what the product is, that kind of thing.
So let me answer your first question. So starting something new in a large company and then doing something outside of a large company on your own. I believe that sort of like if you put a sigma on that equation, the pain points are all the same. It's just that the numbers are a little different. The scales are different. But at the end, the sigma is the same. So it is difficult. there's a lot of challenges. Of course, there's a lot of rewards that goes along with both of them. In a large company, gaining access to capital is easy. Because you have the big company name and the resources behind you, finding people is also easier. But then the pain of finding a spot for your new invention, new technology inside a large company, that is very challenging because large companies are not equipped to handle radical innovation or new inventions. Anything outside of incremental improvement is very difficult to find a spot for it. Outside, you basically have many degrees of freedom, but you have to find capital, you have to find people, and you have to find the market fit. And so I think just the level that you have to put into all of those things, level of effort, is different. But at the end of the day, it's all the same. You still are working 60, 70-hour weeks and not sleeping at night because you're worried about something going wrong in that equation. Namida is a 5-year-old company that was founded here in Northwest Arkansas based on an idea and a concept that came from Dr. Suzanne Klimberg, a world-famous breast cancer surgeon and oncologist. She's the head of oncology now at UTMB in Texas. At the time that she thought of this concept in mid-2000s, she was the head of breast and ovarian cancer program at UAMS. She noticed that her patients coming in from rural areas of Arkansas always had much higher grade and more advanced breast cancer than the ones from metropolitan areas. And that's because they don't screen. They live too far away from screening centers that are usually in larger cities. And she was looking for a way of screening women for breast cancer that did not require imaging equipment and radiologists and can be done at an OBGYN or at primary care level. And around that time, sort of a mutual friend of both of ours, Dr. Suzanne Love at UCLA, also a breast cancer surgeon, she had found breast cancer markers in milk of lactating women, which is a very unusual thing, but it was there. And as a surgeon, our Suzanne Klimberg, realized that the process that the body goes through to make milk is very similar to the process of making tears. So if you can find those markers in milk, can you find them in tears? And that was basically the genesis of this idea. And so many years, almost 20 years of work has gone into this. We took over this work in 2013, and in 2019 we established Namida to commercialize it. And we've been in the market now with a product called Aria, and it's a direct-to-consumer and available through some employers and some B2B channels. We look for protein biomarkers that are found in tears, and based on that, we recommend a follow-up imaging test. And there are many gaps in sort of what we offer for women in breast cancer screening. Part of it is that there's just not enough radiologists or radiology technicians to screen everybody, and there's just not enough equipment out there. So our screening rates for the country, it's below 50%, even though we spend about $16 billion a year in the U.S. on screening. And as a result, cancers are found late. There's mortality among U.S. women because of that. Plus, cancer is moving to younger populations now, where maybe 30 years ago, cancer was a disease of the middle age to old age. It has become a disease of the young to old age. And half the mortality in women in the U.S. in breast cancer is under the age of 45, and many of them never screen. So our test is filling some of the gaps in care that exist today. And we were the first ones to actually bring this product to market.
I know one time you were telling me a metaphor about the difference between a mammogram and this kind of screening. And would you mind talking about that?
Oh, I have a lot of metaphors when it comes
This
to
one
them.
was like, the forest metaphor.
Oh, yes. So coming from an imaging background and child of the Cold War, the big thing during the Cold War, as you might remember, Matt, was all the Warsaw Pact armor that was basically on the borders of West Germany, the East Germany and all the Russian tanks and such. And the U.S. routinely photographed those forests in the Fulda Gap for presence of tanks. And, but from 30, 40, 50, 60,000 feet above ground, a lot of things look like tanks, and you have to go in there and find them. So when you use imaging as your first line of screening, there's a lot of things that can show up in an X-ray that are not cancer. But the way
false positives,
you have to go in there and do a biopsy to see what it is that you saw. Just like during the Cold War, we probably had to send someone across the East German border to see if that's a tank or it's just a tractor that was misplaced. So using imaging as a first line of screening is inefficient. And there's a lot of new technologies, including lab tests like ours, that are going to solve that problem.
So, I could see how there'd be lots of false positives with that kind of imaging. It's also very uncomfortable for women.
Yeah.
Some people probably don't want to do it because of...
No, I mean, we get feedback from our clients who have used our test, and many of them complain about the pressure because you have to put about 50 pounds of pressure on the breast tissue to flatten it so you can image it better with X-rays.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that much. So would you mind talking a little bit about your channel of distribution? I know your direct-to-consumer is one of them. Would you talk about that one?
Sure. We went to market last year as a direct-to-consumer product. So it's something that COVID really opened up that door for a lot of offerings as a direct-to-consumer test. There are a lot of companies out there that offer a lot of different type of tests as direct-to-consumer. So we started going direct-to-consumer, and in our first year, we have shipped a couple of thousand units, it has been a success. Comparing ourselves to other companies that have come up with novel tests, they're lucky if they sell a few hundred tests the first year out. So there's a need for that, and direct-to-consumer comes with its own challenges. There's a lot of education that goes on, plus the consumer behavior online, which is you have to see something, and then you have to see something again, and you have to see something maybe a second or third or fourth time, and then get educated about it. And each one of those steps means you have to write another check to Google or Meta for an Instagram post or for a Facebook ad. And so it gets expensive. So if you're trying to keep your price down, your customer acquisition cost in that sort of about the consumer behavior online gets very expensive. And in order to get around that and not run out of cash, we have come up with some new models of going after consumers. The same consumers that are buying our tests are probably also clients of medical spas, concierge doctors, or functional medicine physicians. And these are all the cash-paying side of U.S. healthcare. And so going through those channels, we're reaching the same consumers just at the much lower customer acquisition cost. But we believe our biggest impact is going to be through our B2B channels. Large employers. So for large employers, healthcare is now cancer is their number one driver of costs in their healthcare. As a matter of fact, we were talking to one employer today that their costs of cancer care has gone up by 80% in 1 year. And most of it has to do with finding cancers in late stages and then using very expensive drugs and therapies. Almost every visit that stage of cancer costs the company somewhere between 40 to 50,000.
Oh my goodness! I had no idea it was that high.
There are a lot of biologic drugs now that cost $1 million per course of treatment. So it's very easy to get to that number now. So employers want to find cancers early. And if less than 50% of the population is screening, for example, for breast cancer, they want a tool that would get more people to screen. So our test is inexpensive, it's accurate, and it gets people to go screen. Same with accountable care organizations, same with health plans. The goal is to get more people screened and to find cancers early, because cancers that are found early are treatable, survivable, and inexpensive to treat.
Omid, thank you so much for taking time to visit with us. Your stories about innovation and entrepreneurship are just really interesting. And I loved your story about Intel versus NVIDIA. That's an amazing story.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the invitation.
If you're finding value in this podcast, we greatly appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Additionally, following us on Apple and Spotify and leaving up to a 5-star review would be immensely helpful. We welcome any feedback or questions related to the podcast, as well as suggestions for further topics and guests. You can leave your comments on our YouTube channel, and rest assured that I will read each and every one of them. Please also take a moment to check out our podcast sponsors, as they play a critical role in keeping this podcast running. For more information on specific topics, timestamps, or links to articles mentioned during the podcast, head over to mattwallerpodcast.com.